Continuing my conversation with James Jones on our CCA Leadership Development Community podcast. My name is Michael Clark, and James, for this segment, I want to talk about your experience working internationally. Our last section, we talked about your career path. We talked about how you went from starting as a pension actuary to now doing a lot of global M&A consulting. So in your work, though, because of this, you end up working in many cross-border situations. And that is going to present some interesting opportunities and complexities. So, what have you learned about navigating those complexities when you're dealing with different cultures, even maybe within the same company?
Yeah, so great point is one of the things that I've learned is that the US is the exception and not the rule. So if I start with some of the technical actuarial things that we do are related to pension plans or other aspects of HR, many of the rules that we have in the US are actually not the way the rest of the world works.
Mhm.
Specifically, if we think about how pension plans are viewed, if we think about how employees move from one legal entity to another, we're the exception, not the rule. So if you can hear where I'm going with this, I think it's part of also being open that your way may not be the only way in how things are done. That's probably the primary rule that I've learned in working cross border. The other thing is that we're more alike than not, right? So once you get to the basic concepts, many of the things that we do are very similar. It's just that you have to be able to get out of the deep narrow aspect of this is the terminology that's used and understand what's the general concept of what we're trying to accomplish. Those are the two things. And then I talked about the language. The language really does kind of make it's not as difficult as you would think. Specifically now with many of the computer and computer assisted tools that we have, it's not that difficult to at least understand as something is in another language. Now, I'm not asking you to be an expert. I don't think you want to Google translate everything, but again, what are the concepts that we're trying to accomplish, and how do you make that? How do you address the similarities and the differences?
So, I'm sure you've got to have some funny story though about like cultural differences in working in these different countries where you've been, whether it was a unintentional faux pas or something to that effect.
I'd say definitely there's a lot of stories that I have in working internationally and cross border. I think one of the biggest stories that I realized, which was to my advantage, is specifically as we think about working in Latin America, a lot of things are done around food and meals. So it's great that you're having a meeting. It's better when you're having a meeting right before or after lunch, and recognizing the importance of lunch and that meal and that bonding time to get to know the person. I think many times we come into a meeting from a U.S. perspective, and it's like, here's what we're going to talk about, and this is what we have to do. In other cultures, it's not necessarily like that. I remember going to one meeting a little bit late and thinking, oh, I'll just listen and then I'll throw in my 2 cents later. Well, unfortunately, in certain cultures, you have to say hello to everyone on the phone, and they say hello to you before you even get to your point. So the fact that I thought, oh, I can just jump in and say my 2 cents here, it's like, no, hey James, how are you? All is well. And I had to do that with every person. That and I'm like, wait, I'm just trying to get to the point. But again, relationships matter, and specifically one of the things that I've learned working internationally is that it is definitely about the relationships.
What I find very interesting about that is that anybody that has ever had the opportunity to work with James or associate with him, I mean, you've pretty much embodied that in how you do your work here in the US, I would say. Like it's very relationship based. And I mean, I can think of instances where you're going around even the room in a CCA board meeting and making sure that you have acknowledged everybody's presence there in some form or fashion. Um, uh, I'll share my own personal story of that. A couple of times in CCA board meetings, I'd be sitting across the room from James, and my phone would buzz, and it's James saying, "I am so glad to see you. How are you?"
But I think that's important, and again, it goes back to what I learned working internationally, but also what I learned growing up in my community, making sure you check in on others. It's not just transactional, even though yeah, I'm a transactions professional. That's what I do, but it's also around interaction and relationship and ensuring how do you ensure that that person is going to be successful, that that person is going to have a positive experience, be it a meeting or be it going through a divestiture or a merger.
That is really interesting. Um, let's talk about some of this diversity that and what you've experienced there, because you've obviously seen a lot of it between Latin America, Southeast Asia, your own work in the U.S. What benefits have you seen that come from diversity when a company, and I'll put this in quotes, does it right? Because that obviously, for somebody to define what it means to do it right when it comes to diversity, I think you get different answers depending on who you ask. So, I mean, what benefits have you seen come from diversity in the different companies that you've been working with?
I think number one is understanding that everyone's not the same. And even though you may look the same, come from the same school, have the same background, approaches are different. And I think by having a more diverse workforce, you're able to leverage the team that you have that thinks differently from you. Now, again, there may be a prevailing attribute that we have, right? A prevailing archetype. We are drivers, or we're guardians of data, or we are pioneers because we think pie in the sky or high level. But to ensure that your team embraces all of those qualities, specifically as we're helping our clients, helps to ensure that you're not missing anything, that you're asking those questions internally and thinking about what the solutions may be, and recognizing how to dial your working style up or down based off of your clients, based off of your audience. For me, that's where diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, that's really where it resonates with me.
Well, and I love what you said there too. The word that you use that I'll go back to is embrace. It's not enough to have different people around the table with different skill sets and different ways of thinking. You actually have to embrace those differences, and that can be challenging for some people because well, I would say for many people, because what you are bringing to the table are people that are going to challenge your way of thinking, and that's not always easy.
And specifically in M&A, I'll just be very transparent. In M&A, many of the things that we're doing, we're driving to a deadline. We're trying to get to day one. And for some individuals, their way of thinking is a little bit longer, a little bit higher, and not as much as a deadline driven approach. And that's okay. Um, I think you also have to recognize, though, in your situation, what needs to get done and what can be deferred. And sometimes those voices may need to be deferred, but not denied, right? You still want to hear it. You still want to make sure you're getting that information, but recognizing what's our ultimate goal. Again, that's the driver and guardian in me. So I recognize what my two archetypes are. But for other people who need to be able to take the time to tell the story, many times you need to allow them that time because you may miss something if you don't.
So let's talk about the flip side to it being done well. What challenges have you seen when it isn't done correctly, when that diversity is not embraced?
Um, I think what I've seen many times is from a client perspective, right? Clients will look at certain teams and go, "Wait a minute, everything that I'm hearing is the same. No one's giving me any counter thoughts of things that could be done different, or you recognize specifically within the world of HR. Sometimes I've seen from a gender perspective where there are gender differences between between my client team and between the team that I'm leading. How do you ensure that it makes sense? And again, I don't think you're just going to put people on a team just to have it, but you want to make sure that you're allowing all perspectives to be brought so you can bring the best solutions to your clients.
All right, so tangential to some of this stuff. We've talked about you working internationally. What is your favorite thing, or one of the most favorite things that you have eaten as you have gone internationally? Like when you go somewhere, when you go out of the country and you go to a certain place, you're like, I have to have this. It's my favorite.
Oh, wow. So and you want me to choose one?
I just said a favorite. Like I know you've got a bunch, so
Okay, so I'll go with the easiest one. Again, as a Texan, uh, beef and barbecue is something that's extremely important to me. I tried to do vegan for a couple of years. That did not go well for me. I still have an affinity for beef, and when I go to Brazil and Argentina, the beef there is phenomenal. So I would definitely say a churrascaria in Brazil definitely is something that I would I enjoy a lot. Second would be Peruvian cuisine, and in Peru, you can just feed me anything except seafood because I'm allergic to seafood. That's a whole other conversation. But Peruvian cuisine was probably one of the best things that I had to discover, and would recommend that cuisine to anybody.
is that like pupusas and empanadas, or is it something different
So
than that?
it's more of seafood because there is some seafood, but
Yeah.
things like and Creole dishes. So dishes like ají de gallina, dishes like lomo saltado. There's this fusion they do with Chinese food and Peruvian ingredients that if you have the chance to taste shifa, which is what it's called, please do. And if you have a sweet tooth, Suspiro de Limeña is a dessert that I love sugar and sweet and milk, and I'm probably going to go into a coma just thinking about it, but definitely I would recommend it.
All right, we are giving our listeners more than they bargained for today. They're getting professional advice as well as culinary advice. But I think that's great. I mean, you've had unique experiences that way, and so Peruvian food though, that's the one I'm gonna have to seek out. So,
I would highly recommend it.
all right, absolutely.